Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching with myself, Mark Carroll. In today's episode, we are going to look at the psychological need requirements of not athletes, at least not directly athletes, but actually coaches. Okay, so we're going to kind of discuss this in the context of coaches because that's often um, taken for granted, the fact that coaches in themselves are performers and also people who are deserving of environmental support for basic psychological needs. So we're going to get into that today. Now, before we do, I just want to mention it's amazing the amount of support the podcast has been given. If you are following the podcast and are subscribed to the podcast, so honestly, thank you so much. If you are listening to the show maybe for the first time or you've been here a couple of times, you keep coming back, I would just encourage you if you could please subscribe, whatever it is that you listen to your podcast. Even better as well, if you can give it a rating, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that also is a really massive help. If you can comment on the episodes within the podcast apps, even better. It's been quite nice actually seeing some comments appear. I see them more easily in Spotify, but yeah, across the piece, and I'll look to actually reply where I can too. All that would be a massive difference, I think, to just helping the show grow more. So I just want to put it there and say, yeah, thank you for your support. So anyway, I digress. So let's touch on this topic. I kind of gave a brief introduction already about trying to what the sort of reason for having this focus on the coach is. And I think it's because we do need to reposition the coach as a performer. You know, we know as coaches how hard coaching is. We are doing our best. We also know like how impacted we are by our environment, you know, in the sense that the amount of times that I've been and I've worked across a lot of different environments where I've came back and I felt pretty good about myself, but also maybe felt a bit stagnant as well, versus environments where I feel like I'm thriving and the environment is, actually actively supporting and fostering that development of competence. To be in environments where you really feel part of a community and you want to give back to that community because you help each other, to environments where maybe it just feels a bit isolated, you know, if it's not necessarily when you do meet up, it's just it's infrequent or within your own little bubbles. If you work within different age groups, it just feels like, yeah, there's not just that whole much support. If it's maybe at a team level in terms of the coaches you work with within an age group or across the actual wider environment, experience a lot of that. The experiencing, in the sense of feeling like I'm really taking control of my sessions and what we're aiming towards, having that ownership of that and feeling a neutral, I suppose, of my development as well, and and that, how that sort of funnels into it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now. I'm going to combine research within academia that's actually looked at this topic already, but also just some of my own personal reflections and some speculations in parts here as well. I won't be able to cover all the different facets of how autonomy, competence, and relatedness can be supported, because it's so contextualized to a degree. Hopefully, what I can reach is after offering a few different examples. I would encourage you as a listener to consider them for yourself and build on them with your own thoughts. This can be listened to, I suppose, in any one of three perspectives. One as the coach, as an individual, in terms of reflecting on how well your needs are currently being supported, your psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Perhaps with the idea of then starting to reflect on how much your environment is serving you while you're trying to serve your environment. As coaches, we need to make sure that we're in the right place, and maybe that can trigger not necessarily the nuclear option of separating from where you're at, but maybe engaging the people who are responsible for, in part, shaping your behaviour, and we'll get to that. Also, this could be sort of listened to from the perspective of a coaching team, and that doesn't need to be a academy or club level per se. That's a macro level team, I suppose, but it might even just be within the little age group that you're coaching. If it's working with two other coaches, or maybe you're taking your son or your daughter's team in the community. And again, it extends across performance and recreational contexts, but that little team that you have, because maybe you're able to kind of self-govern a little bit. Well, if you're in that community sphere, particularly where it sometimes can be just a team rather than a club with multiple little teams in it, or maybe it is the latter case, and you can consider how you can, in some ways, a team compensate for where maybe there is a lack of macro level club wide support, but within your little bubble as a team, you're doing some really good stuff to mitigate some of the concerns there, or maybe actually from listening to some of this conversation, I'll hopefully make you reflect on, could you be doing better for each other? Is your coaching partner affecting your psychological need satisfaction in some respect, and vice versa? So, and then the third perspective that you could listen to this conversation from is the wider administrator. So, operational leads who are maybe governing an entire environment, who set in place the structures that others adhere to, those sorts of things, and how you can support them. So that's the three perspective. I will be honest, I'll probably speak more to the second and third perspective, just because self-determination theory is often posited to help us ascertain the impact that others have on others. Again, I put in the first perspective of you as an individual for your own reflection, because that does matter. But I want you to, always be reflecting on the wider environment, okay, and how that interaction plays out. So I will talk mostly from that sort of shared responsibility. So part of the reason, before I get into talking about how autonomy and competence and relatedness could each be supported independently, and also in their interactions with one another, from the coach's perspective, consider what we're trying to get at, because again, remember episodes that are a bit newer with understanding the motivational environment and the motivational sequence as proposed by self-determination theory, that psychological needs impact the extent to which we feel self-determined or non-self-determined, and the reasons for why we partake in activity and continue to take part in an activity. Now, I think coaches actually are a little behind athletes, in the sense of, if I was to, and I know I'm sort of generalizing here, but if you consider that an athlete takes up a sport for, well, hopefully, one of the prime reasons is just the intrinsic love of the sport and just the pure passion that they have for being part of that sport. Coaching, because often people, interact with coaching at a stage of their life where there, there's a vested interest in why they're doing it, and there's often a connection between why they're doing it and some other goal or mechanism at play. It's not to say that there aren't coaches who do it for the absolute passion of it, but just the fact that, why does the typical parent take their son or daughter's team? Well, because, and why did they go through the hardship of coaching, the labours of coaching? Because they see a value in it, or because maybe it's became over time integrated as their sense of self and who they are. That professional coach, yes, they love the sport, but they also do have extrinsic reasons for doing it, because they can make a living out of it. So I've just made the case that we know by default that coaches, but everyone has, we're complicated, so there's multiple reasons why we do things, but there's maybe a little bit more expectation that coaches are doing things for non-self-determined reasons, or rather for extrinsic reasons. But what we can hopefully push them further towards is the more self-determined forms of extrinsic reasons for doing things, because they see value in it, because it's part of their identity, not because there's so much because of the guilt element, or because of some sort of reward or threat element to it, within reason. Coaches are also highly aspirational, and the reward mechanism within coaching is also very powerful. But I just mean in the sense that of trying to understand why this might be not doubly important, but there's a real incentive here to really consider how we can better shape coaches' motivational orientation towards something that is more adaptive, and to lead to a lot of different outcomes that I'll go on to later on in the conversation. So let's think about autonomy. What does autonomy mean for a coach in their role? Okay, and some of the things that coaches can appreciate insofar as how we can support a coach's autonomy, okay, is autonomy is opportunity for choice within boundaries. Okay, and if you think about, my experience when I've been coaching, is I've been given a bit of a directive. There's goalposts, there's outcomes that I've been told to try and achieve with athletes, but having autonomy to go and make the session my own in some respects, and to connect the dots in the way that I think is best, offers a sense of agency, and that, I can do what I know I do best in order to achieve the outcomes. I'm not necessarily being commanded to coach in an overly specific, overly directed way, overly, I don't know, environment centered way, in the way that the environment's driving the behavior, rather than me driving it with the support of the environment. Sometimes because we know what we do best as coaches, sometimes, not feeling that you have that sense of autonomy to go and achieve things the way you know how, actually impacts your sense of competence as well. Because what if you're pushed towards a way of coaching or a way of achieving the outcome that isn't actually reflecting of what you do best? So like that in itself is something that's a bit of a inhibitor sometimes to you showing what you can do, and so far as how you often feel as a coach, certainly the way it was for me and continues to be the way it is for me. I feel as good as my last session a lot of times. That's confidence matters in coaching. Remember the coach as a performer and also as someone that's deserving of support. The performer needs confidence and knowing what they do best and be able to lean into their superpowers, through having the agency to do that and to go and achieve the outcome. And with some directives, yes, but not overpowering directives is quite important. So I think we need to do that. Offering input to coaches in decisions that affect them, acknowledging their thoughts and feelings and having conversations within those decision making processes is massively powerful, so that through the dialogue, let's say again, because there could be a disagreement or maybe a different train of thought, but if someone's offering me the chance to talk about it, get my perspective on it, maybe even better then, but build my perspective into their way of doing it, either not to capitulate to me and tell me that I can just go and do what I want, but even if they're telling me, you know what, Mark, you still need to do what we're asking, but you can approach it in this way that makes sense, or we can build that in, or here's why I need you to do this, and just explain it to me. That as a coach is going to help me be more volitional in my behaviour, and now assign credibility to what I'm being asked to do as a coach, and I'm now taking that behaviour forward more volitionally, more harmoniously with the environment, and I feel integrated with the environment as well. So we've had that dialogue. There's a sense of interpersonal involvement. Maybe within that dialogue as well, I've been able to ask for clarity around things. So the structure is there. I know I'm not even came on to these parts yet, but you're starting to see how the autonomy, competence, relatedness folds into each other from the coach's perspective, how we can support the coach's needs. But that's really helpful. I mean, my specific area and understanding why coaches behave the way they do, I think that's massively important, just insofar as being able to have real insight into a coach's behaviour before we then ask them to do this, this, and that. And we will maybe return to that. Actually, we'll start a pin in that for now, but let's return to that when we talk about structure a little more directly. So that stuff's really, really important. There's also, and this sometimes you might think, oh, how is this autonomy? But try to offer coaches stability wherever possible. And what I mean by this is we don't necessarily, and it's often been found in a lot of sense where job security feels low in coaching, that doesn't help someone feel in control of their behaviour, because in some sense they're always then being controlled by the external pressure on top of them. Now there's different environments and to different extents to which this can really ever be helped in performance focused environments. It comes down to results sometimes, and the administrators, administrative staff, operational lead staff, the people that are stakeholders in that respect, they can't take that out of the equation for the coach. But just consider how you can help the coach's perception of your support, and that winning or losing doesn't impact the extent to which you have a relationship to them, to the point where that actually starts to control their motivations for why they do it, and control their behaviour to the point where that becomes what they focus on, you know? And this is where a lot of feelings of sort of like helping the coach develop while helping the coach develop your athletes is from the perspective of that administrator is quite key, because we want to push the coach to be the best they can be and help the coach also understand what they need to do to assimilate to the standards of the environment. But we want to be in a space where the coach does feel that that they can, that their relationship isn't contingent on results, and that their everyday stability and structure isn't, absolutely, going to change night and day based on one result to the next. That wherever job security is a massive thing, because and this builds into agency in the so far as someone feeling in control of the next month of the life or the next season of the life, and those sorts of feelings are, and it is a wee bit of a blur and a blend there between that and just how you generally feel connected to the environment, and how to the extent to which the environment's making you feel a sense of belonging. But job security is big in coaching, and because that is agency, making someone feel capable of moving into the environment and through the environment, and staying within it. Those sort of things are important. So consider the stability of your conditions. Also, and I mean it's a wee bit speculative, but also consider is there adequate compensation to the coach, in order to allow them to feel in control of their wider life and what the job is meant to satisfy, certainly in the respects where it's a professional job. That comes into play as well, because money is autonomy to a point. It's allowing people to have control over or help them manage other pressures external to coaching. So there's a lot of stuff in there. Okay, and also I think there's a little bit around what stable and projecting basically that you have there's a monetary element to it that the coach finds satisfactory is probably also telling them about how well they're respected in the environment. So I think that's also something just to consider. So these things kind of play in with each other a little bit. I suppose here I've been touching a little bit on structure. I'm drilling into this more now. So structure within an environment for a coach is massive. Okay. Now there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about structure because it's often again the counterbalance of autonomy. We can't have pure autonomy with no structure to help us understand how to interact effectively with our environment as a coach. So even though a coach, let's say back to the initial example that I gave, where I want to have some autonomy to decide what practice I put on in order to achieve, whatever that block of practice is looking to achieve. I still need to maybe have some direction about what I need to actually do in order to get to there in some respects too. One of the things within a community coaching space is, and I say this all the time when I'm doing coach education as well, through NGBs, coaches need content. They want content. They want ideas. And that's because a lot of coaches, particularly when they're new, they don't always have the ideas, and so they might want that. Even for the coach who is feeling like they do have ideas for the activities themselves at the sort of basic level, the fundamental level, they might also still want to at least have a sense of how do you want me to go about this to ensure that I can achieve the ends that you want. There's a lot of professional expectations put on coaches, particularly within obviously professional spaces. A lot of coaches have got not just a technical tactical game model to adhere to, but they also are told that their squad needs to be fit. They're told that their squad needs to be in the right mentality, the right mindset for things. But how do they actually achieve that? If a coach doesn't know what to do and doesn't have a plan to do that, it removes their capacity um, to feel in control of that situation. Yeah, kind of going back to agency, we want to feel in control of our own situation. So that's where scaffolding is really important, where a coach requires it. Scaffolding can be in terms of like, do you have like a coaching crib, what's equivalent to a teaching crib? It's like, you don't need to necessarily tell me the exact activity to do, but the properties of what the activity should be. So the coach can know is roughly what you're looking for. So that might be we're looking for a game related practice. X amount of that of the session should be game related, or we're looking for a practice that's utilising this amount of the park, or whatever equivalent space is that you use in your own sport. If it's not football or whatever, swimming, tennis, you name it. Those sorts of things. Here's the intensity level we would expect the players to be working at. Those sorts of things. They things are going to help the coach feel effective essentially by helping them be effective. Okay. So I think that's really, really important. Mentorship matters as well because coaches want to feel good, but they also want to get good. Okay. And every coach wants to feel like they are actually mastering what they're doing. Going back to what is an intrinsic motivation all about. It's about feeling efficacious while doing something that you're passionate about and that you feel you have control over. If coaches don't feel that they're getting better at something and mastering an activity, that's a big inhibitor to the more adaptive forms of motivation we want to see, the self-determined forms of motivation that we want to bring out in coaches. And consider for that new coach. So, I mean, I was this person. I remember particularly when I made a jump from like more community sport um, to working in an academy the first time. It was a big jump. And I was really fortunate that I had a coach who was able to not just help me get better, but tell me what I need to improve on, and being quite direct at times and never, but also a coach who was helpful in nudging me and telling me that, you're doing quite good here and this is what you're already doing well, because we need to actually ensure that we're making coaches feel good about themselves, and the feedback should be good. This is where sometimes, and we might take mentorship in this respect to be that coaching partner that you're working with, maybe that older, more experienced coach, but it might also be just, from an operational lead point of view, how you put on staff CPD, how you interact with your coaches day to day, those whatever periods you decide to assign to that. That might be the problem in itself, that you assign periods as opposed to making it part of your culture where it's just an everyday occurrence. That again, that's really important. How often um, do you feel as a coach that you're left alone too much? And this is where autonomy goes astray again. And that's why we need structure. Structure isn't just about telling me what to do, but checking in on me. That is also relatedness to it, checking in on me and, helping remind me of the expectations, so the expectations remain clear, and continuously being there so that you can scaffold the environment to help me as the coach achieve what you want. So these things do matter, but checking in on coaches, and the reason why I say that and checking in and coaching, but do it from a positive standpoint and not just about what they keep needing to get better at. Sometimes we have from a mentorship, coach developer side of things, we often come into conversations with coaches about what we can fix. And I don't think that's often, well, that's offering structure in some sense. It can dilute feelings of competence if we aren't actually just offering validation to coaches as well. Sometimes that's all that's needed. Not all the time, but sometimes. And this is why I would always say, how do you blend that well? Well, for me, it's about actually praising coaches for what they're already doing towards what you want them to do, and then give them the even better if for how you can take them further. So, that we're seeing the two edges of the sword there. The bit about how we get coaches better, but also how we make feel coaches feel good, and the mentor type relationships that we have in there. I think that's really important. And then there's about, do we actually, and this maybe is building upon not just giving coaches at the basic level content, session ideas, and giving them clearly defined goalposts and the things they need to work at, across the session or across a week, and explaining those things to them so they understand it, allowing opportunities to clarify things with you, being an approachable person, and that will build on this further when we talk about how we can support coaches relatedness to the ends of helping competence, and to the ends of helping them feel more in control and have more agency over their situation. We actually need to provide opportunities for development. Now, opportunities for development, when you say what I mean by that, let's say you appreciate a coach can get better at something. Okay, are you actually resourcing them? Maybe to go and do a course. Maybe for clubs that have a bit of money in the pot and and that's there. And are you encouraging them to go and actually um go and do that course? It's like, so you've got a coach who's a level 1 coach and there's a level 2 license course coming up. Are you, one, encouraging the coach to do it? Because that is by extension telling them that you feel they are competent enough to go and achieve those things, which is, telling them you feel they are competent. But two, also resourcing them to allow them to make that happen. Or if you can't resource them, maybe you're a club that's an amateur team, you've not got a lot of money. Is there things that you're making effort to help them with that might help them in getting out of that course themselves? Maybe you're covering their session a few nights out for a couple of months because that lets them go and do that course that they know they really need to make them feel better at what they do, and they can bring that back. Like, how much are you actually helping coaches to that end? Also, I think what's really important for people, and this is where you consider the wider environment I'm in, but also the role that wider environment is perhaps playing in my longer term development goals as a coach. Too often, I see turnovers of staff at clubs, and it's because coaches feel that there isn't a clear pathway for their development within the club. And sometimes that's in terms of like where they move within the club, operationally speaking. So from being an assistant coach to one day getting to be a head coach to one day getting to be a head of phase to one day, coaches do want to see a path. Which coaches do look at their environments as a bit of a pyramid. Sometimes that isn't good. And sometimes the conversation, it can be really helpful for helping coaches just understand how they can become world class at what they already do and where they're already at. I think the clear example of that is that we don't have enough enthusiastic children's coaches who want to spend their career in children's coaching because they often just they just see it as a pathway towards the first team, or senior level coaching. And actually, I think quite a bit about competence support can be around helping coaches feel good about what they do there and then, and resourcing them to get better at being that amazing, children's coach, and to really understand their strengths and where their strengths lie. Because, and there's a bit to that there around, don't encourage coaches blindly down a route that you don't think's actually best for them. If you think a coach's personality is really well suited to the children's game, and in a football example, I then have the decision, do I push them towards doing a UEFA B badge in the main youth adult pathway or whatever that's more about working with adults, or to do an advanced children's license, then there's a conversation there about giving them the feedback and the mentorship that they need in their career advice that is really important to push them in the right direction while also making them feel capable of doing that, because you want them to get success as well. It's the same way we want our athletes to do hard things but get success. We want our coaches to do hard things but get success. So that's just something to think about there as well. I think there is a need as well to consider um, incremental periods, incremental conversations across the time that a coach is in your environment. If it's quarterly meetings in the same way, or maybe yearly meetings in the same way that you would expect them to have with their athletes, to talk to them about them. I don't think coaches actually get asked about themselves enough, because they're often told about what they need, what how the players are getting on, and what they're going to do to help the players get on better, and further demands on them. I think actually asking the coach, well, what do you need for your development? And how can we shape the structure we give to help towards that end? And that's really empowering competence support, because actually what that's doing is it's giving the control, the ownership of the coach's development back to them. And actually that's accountability. And it also just, so because now I now know that, you know, my environment is wants me to get better. They also want me to get better in the way I know, in the way I feel I need, and the resourcing it to some degree, or supporting it. So now I don't have an excuse, because a lot of times coaches will say, oh, well, they're not letting me do this, or they're not really taking into account this. So the more you can give a coach input in their own development, that is in its sense a form of competence support, because now you're helping them figure out what they need to do to get better at what they think is important to them. And again, what they feel is important to them is what they're going to engage in, you know, most volitionally. Again, this is all part of the conversations that we probably need to have with coaches around competence support. The next thing that we'll chat about, and we've already been chatting about it, but now that we can kind of shine the light on a little bit as well, is relatedness. So, do you actually feel cared for as a coach? And if you're in charge of coaches, or you work with other coaches, how are you making everyone feel like we're in a community? Now, this can go. Let's think more positively first and foremost. Let's think about how we can signal this and where it maybe goes wrong. But just yet, you know, the simple sense of like asking coaches how they are, talking to them, being approachable so they can talk to you, listening to them, their needs, and acting on what they're telling you. You know, because that actually indicates that you do care enough that you're going to take action towards meeting what they require. And again, we've spoke about that just literally there around for their own competence needs, but how that interpersonal involvement is so huge, because that's what relatedness is. It's interpersonal involvement. And that's what autonomy is. It's highly involved. It's just non-restrictive. Competence has to be, in the scaffolding that you give to a coach, has to be interpersonally involved. So, but that virtue of actually showing how enthusiastic and how all in you are as a coach developer to help a coach get better, that is going to make the coach feel just and show them the care that you have for them, because it's like actions speak louder than words. Yeah. So yes, there is things that we can do that is just words itself, but the actual action of being there all the time and having quite an involved relationship with coaches is really helpful in that. And again, I'd ask you as a coach to reflect on how much people show care for you. And sometimes again, consider wider elements of a coach and what a coach needs, like work-life balance, for example, or just, you know, for the very fact that not a lot of coaches are full-time. A lot of coaches sometimes are volunteers and have got hectic lives outside of training and outside of outside of practice and outside of competition. Does a coach need some cover for a couple of times because of work or because of family reasons, personal reasons? Showing the coach that you care about them more than just having someone fill space in a session is a hugely beneficial relationship, and it makes the coach go, well, this environment's trying to look after me, so I'll look after this environment. So care feeds care. Coaches want to care for each other. It actually gives actually the feeling of relatedness and supporting others' relatedness offers a sense of satisfaction within ourselves. You know, that in itself is it's a dopamine hit, and we want to return to that. So, you know, care is so important in coaching for coaches towards other coaches. Think as well about, you know, considering how overworked we are as coaches. This is maybe one for within a coaching team, because I've seen this in my own research, particularly that within a grassroots space where, you know, oftentimes there's a lot put on coaches because we can't delegate in the same way. So within that little coaching team, you know, it's really important that we're sharing the workload and not giving everything to one coach. How many times have you heard of coaches that burn out because they're just given too much responsibility, and it's perceived as a lack of care towards them by by that coach, that they perceive it as a lack of care towards them because they don't feel the rest of the coaching team cares about them enough, and they're shying away from doing jobs and putting it on to other people. And it's a real shame, that, because it can really pollute the initial enthusiasm and care that a coach has, because they just become overrun. So that sort of stuff is really, really important. We also need to consider, as a wider academy, or a wider club and organisation, how often do the coaches get to actually see each other and talk to each other, interact with each other? Because sometimes I gave an example of looking out for each other within your individual coaching teams, but if your individual coaching teams are part of a wider makeup of a club, is there enough of an integration that we feel all the time as coaches that we're part of something bigger, or do we feel like we're little kind of separated islands that never really of little tribes that don't really meet each other ever? There's a lot of disconnect in that way, and sometimes unnecessary ill feeling that can come about through coaches just not being around each other enough, particularly when it then becomes mixed in with, feeling like, oh, I'm not getting help to get better, or why is that coach in the age group above me getting that opportunity? The more distant we are from each other, the less humanized we feel about each other. Um, and this is almost and sometimes, yeah, you might have that WhatsApp group, for example, where it seems like there's a lot of communication, but you're not physically in front of one another enough to again reconnect as people and support each other and care for each other. So and we know just how important it is. Coach is so tough. It's so tough. It's so postural as well. Not trying to outstage each other and showing each other that we can be vulnerable for each other, and how we can, create an environment where people actually feel empowered to reveal their vulnerabilities. And remember, that's what relatedness does, is it develops trust in an environment. So actually just a sense of everyone showing humility and a bit of humbleness and a bit of vulnerability. That is developing trust within each other to actually expose our weaknesses so that we can get better. So it's helping unlock, situations where we can build competence, and actually probably unlocking conversations where we give input, for what we require, and give input for maybe how we can shape what the club does. And that's because, again, this is also how we unlock good ideas that are already there from coaches and what they already do that is effective and what they are knowledgeable about. So all these things work in with each other. You need to give a coach a sense of control so that they feel they have agency to take command of their situation and control it to a degree. You need to give them a sense of control so they can, just feel like they're acting in some way that's still volitional with what they value and what they care about and what they can respect. So again, the smaller behaviours within that of just explaining tasks that you need them to do, or having tasks explained to you, I suppose, if we're talking about it from the individual coach perspective within this conversation. We then need to have, environments that are structured to help me as the coach get better, but also help me as the coach feel good about myself. And then, as we just finished on there, talking a little bit about just making us feel part of something and feeling like we belong, even to the point of making us feel like the way we think about the game is the same as others, or even actually how much do we actually support, and sorry, I'm going back to this here, but how much do we actually support uniqueness and innovative thought within an environment? There's often a real tendency to try and get coaches to all think in the same way. And also, at a certain level, that's important. To shared mental models are important for then what we then produce for athletes. But is actually our uniqueness being celebrated? Is individualism being celebrated within coaching circles so that coaches feel empowered to be authentic as they move towards the goalpost set by the environment? And do they feel inspired to give back to the environment and give that extra 10% because what they bring to the table is valued as being uniquely valuable? And that's something to that as well. So that's the way in which the three sort of psychology needs sort of fold into each other. Now, why do we actually care about this? What impact has this been shown to have on the coach creating motivational environment? Well, the whole sort of motivational sequence that we know about from the athlete to coach perspective, or coach to athlete perspective rather, whereby the coach influences the athletes need satisfaction or feelings of frustration. That impacts the athlete's quality of motivation, which impacts their level of persistence and all those sorts of things. It's no different with the coach. There's been a lot of findings by really, really key authors in this space, are like Stebbins and colleagues. There's a really great fundamental paper by Alan and Shaw in 2009 that looked at, performance coaches' needs. Been supported by Rocky and Pelletier as recent as 2017. At least there was a paper that stood out to me there, where they've actually looked at the influence of supporting coaches' psychological needs on their behaviours towards athletes. So it's kind of like when you think about, like, Richard Branson, who talks a little bit about supporting the staff, so the staff support the customer. It's very much the same in coaching. So coaches have been found, take example this study by Rocky and Platier in 2017, where they actually found that through sort of, I think it was, yeah, structural equation modeling, where basically they put a hypothesis of how things might interrelate, and they tested it in an environment, and they seen that there was conformity to this sequence, this pathology, if you will, and whereby if the coaches felt that their needs were met, psychological needs were met in the environment, the coaches went on to develop autonomous forms of motivation. The coaches then wanted to actually support athletes' motivation in the same respect. So they actually seen more supportive interpersonal behaviours towards the athlete. They have been empowered in their own behaviour, so they want to empower athletes to a degree as well in their behaviour. So that's actually been found, and the opposite's also been found, where coaches feel more controlled, and that comes out of effect of not feeling like their needs have been met. So they then, the more non-self extrinsic forms of motivation are at play there for why they continue to show up and turn up and play. They become controlled by that and by their environment more, so they start to move towards outcomes in the environment. And then all of a sudden, coaching becomes more coach-centered, but not in the way that's actually supporting athletes' needs. And at the same time, so they actually been shown to have more controlling behaviours as a result. Similarly speaking, there was some really interesting work by Stebbins and colleagues, Stebbins, Taylor, and Spray, and to Manis and stuff across. I think there was a very good paper in 2012 particularly that found low psychological need support of a coach also was related to low perceived psychological well-being and low autonomy supportive coaching behaviours and higher controlling coaching behaviours. So, and the opposite being true with it, in the reverse case, where if a coach felt supported, they felt higher sense of well-being, they felt more likely to support athletes' autonomy. And again, there's even some of the stuff that I spoke about coaches feeling like, their actual competence needs for getting better, being supported, their professional development, getting better. Alan Shaw's work looked at that, more so focusing on coaches within a performance-focused environment and job security. So they had felt a sense of agency, they could control their situation, work-life balance, because coaching's really overriding. And if coaches don't feel like people care about that, then they just get into a really bad space where, that just what the performance is diminished and their sense of, why they're there, that it just becomes controlled by the environment. And so we see all these things happening. So really, if we care about, as a listener, and I would assume that we do care about our athletes getting the best support of their psychology needs by coaches, we need to look after the coaches first. So reverse it a little bit. It's a bit different. Maybe this is where we go back to thinking more about how do we support our coaches, because that's an indirect way to supporting our athletes. And at least in how self-determination theory-based work is showing us that in the relationships that have been identified. So hopefully that's made you think a little bit. I'll call it there. I'll call it that. And there'll be a lot of other ways in which this pans out. But hopefully that's been useful to you guys. If you have any thoughts yourself, again, comment. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'd love to hear more. We can keep the conversation going there more, and look at any one of the perspectives you think it applies to you. Most in, as an individual coach, is your environment supporting you? As a wee coaching team, are you supporting each other? And as an academy lead, or someone that's head as part of an operational leadership team within a coaching environment, are you actually creating an environment for your coaches that helps them also create a good environment for their athletes? Hopefully that was helpful, guys, and I will see you next time.